our intern sometime is going to be going through our archives and they'll find this stuff and then they'll be like, oh my gosh, conspiracy. Reclaiming man conspiracy.
Preston's beard is fake.
They're a bunch of flat earthers. Yeah, Carl Jung. I think privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. I like that quote.
I've got a bunch of quotes in my monologue as well.
All right, let's go.
Yeah, let's go.
Yeah, all right.
Oh, do you want me to play the music real quick?
I mean, yeah.
Bust out the guitar. Oh, you mean you're going to play it?
Oh, I thought you meant for real.
It'd be way cooler if you did it for real. Oh, yeah, that's awesome. Every time we should do it.
Welcome back, Tribe, to another insightful episode of the Reclaiming Man podcast. I'm your host, Scott Sylvie, and with me, as always, we have Preston, the Southern Canuck Radomski.
Cheers.
We have Michael, the Mastermind Becker.
That's right.
Gentlemen, how are we doing tonight?
I'm doing fantastic. How about you, Michael?
Oh, we're on fire. This is episode 6.
Are we seriously on episode 6?
We're on episode 6.
Oh, moly.
And when you consider that, 90% of podcasts don't get to 13?
Yeah.
So we're almost half to be in top 10% in the history of the world.
Well, and we've already had like 40 topics that we've tentatively scheduled. So.
Oh, yeah. Don't you know? Wow. Did my Minnesota accent come out there?
Sometimes you got to bring that out, Betty.
To all my Southern brothers, I want you to know that I was just misplaced when I was born as a Yankee. So please don't hold that against me.
Hey, I'm never going to technically be considered an actual Tennessean. I don't even know if my children will be.
Oh, you both will. I mean, I've heard you drop y'all quite a bit, and as I was editing the last episodes, I was like, man, there's a couple of y'alls in there.
You might consider us that, but like real Tennesseans we will never be actually counted.
Preston might not even ever be considered an American.
This is true.
Sorry.
Oofda.
Technically, I'll get my citizenship, but I'll always be like a half American, I guess. I've got a green card. Like I'm like a, what did we call it? A resident alien or a permanent resident?
Right on.
Because my mom, when we moved here, like my mom was.
Wait, if you were an alien, did you come on a spaceship, or like if the Earth is flat?
Does that even how do spaceships even work? Like, if the Earth is flat, is gravity even real?
I mean, like, what happens if you come in under the Earth? What's down? Like, why didn't you guys check that out on your way in and let us all know?
I actually came from the great ice caps.
This is the best intro yet, guys.
All right. So today, what are we going to talk about today? It is not flat Earth, I promise you. So you can put your tinfoil hats away. We did just before. That was our other podcast that we record. We did that right before this. So
we should have episode maybe 80. I don't know what a tinfoil hat number is.
I'm scrapping that whole part. All right.
Cool.
All right.
All right. We're on a roll tonight, gentlemen.
I like it.
So today, I'm just glad to be hanging out with you boys. That's
highlight of the day.
So I wanted to talk today about and really just explore the myriad aspects of identity that we've been just working through collectively as a group, as our mastermind of 3, to really reshape how we think about ourselves and who we think we are and what we think we deserve.
Yeah, makes it authentic.
And I'm sure we'll have a conversation about people like Andrew Huberman and Carol Dweck, which I know we've talked about before. James Allen, James Clear. These are a lot of the people in the books and material that have really shaped how I think about identity. And ultimately, I would like to share, if you guys don't mind, a story about how I reshaped my identity and the impact that's had on my life. But before I do that, anything you want to add to the general kind of foundation for talking about identity today?
I think identity, as I get into sort of my story after you tell yours, identity can be very personal and important. I'm sure there's detrimental aspects to it if you identify in the certain aspects, but I mean, identity can be just a guiding light for you to where you have this.
Well, it is, regardless of whether you're conscious of it or not, right?
Right. Yeah.
And I think part of what, when we talk about reclaiming man and what that means, it's taking ownership and agency over your identity and using that to craft the life that you want rather than having it craft the life that you have.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. Reclaiming man, it's built on the concept of us both individually and collectively exploring our identity as men, which seems like it has many different definitions or many different perspectives in the last 10 years. And it is one thing that we tend to overthink, and we're hoping to boil it back down into some of the most important pieces. And so, yeah, looking forward to hearing a little bit about, Scott, specifically your journey with identity and how that's changed in the last 6 months or a year. And I know you're going to quote James Allen, most likely, but
Yeah. Ed Mylett, he'll be in there, I'm sure.
yeah, but one of my favorite James Allen quotes on identity is, a man is literally what he thinks, his character
Mhm.
being the complete sum of all his thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
And we've already had some good content in our first 5 episodes about our thoughts and our actions and our habits. And so this should be a good extension and continuation of some of those ideas, and hopefully digging in a little bit deeper and giving some practical insights about how you can take control of your identity and take control of the rest of your life.
Yeah.
Lay it on
Yeah.
us, brother.
And that quote will show up again in about 5 minutes.
I'm going to set a
Okay.
timer.
This
Go.
might be a few minutes. All right. My identity has been a cornerstone benefit of my life and of what this group in Reclaiming Man, what it has done for me. Perhaps more than anything else, it has been the understanding of what my identity is and how ultimately you are where you are in life as a result of where you believe you deserve to be. And what I mean by that is not necessarily where, if you stop right now and say, well, I think I deserve better. What I mean is deep down in your soul, like in your gut, you have an identity, and that identity shapes the decisions that you make. And I'm going to get into this a bit here in a few minutes, but when I think about now and I look back at my identity, I've talked a lot about how by all outward appearances, I'm a relatively successful guy. I've got a good career and a good family and all that. But my identity, like the core belief of who I was, actually somebody that I don't really like and I don't really respect looking back on it. He had very little self-confidence. And by he, I mean the previous version of myself, my previous identity, didn't think that he deserved the success and the health and the fitness that I was achieving. And as a result, I would consistently sabotage myself in ways that, in retrospect, it's really stupid. Why am I holding myself back? There's all of these external things in the world that are going to hold us back. And so why am I fighting with myself? And so specifically, like with health, over the last 10 years or so, I've oscillated somewhere between being like, oh, I'm just a fat guy, to, wow, look at that obese guy, right? And 320 pounds almost, 315 maybe. And I would just oscillate between those two, right? And I can say that now, but in the moment, I was never really honest about it. I really shied away from the naked truth of the honest truth. And ultimately, I had lost control over my health, but I didn't know what to do about it. And I didn't know how to confront it. And so my journey to reclaiming my identity really started last summer in August. We had spent a couple of weeks up with my wife's family in Wisconsin. And while I was there, I don't think there's any way to say it other than I just massively overindulged, right? I didn't have the self-control she's an amazing cook, which doesn't help, but I entered an environment and I let it control me. And when I got back, I stepped on the scale and the number was big enough that I wouldn't even let the scale settle, right? I was too ashamed to let it settle on an exact number. It was maybe 315, somewhere in that range, but right about the heaviest I'd ever been. And for me, this was really, like, looking back on it, it was certainly rock bottom. I was not only unhealthy in body, but in spirit too. I had no sense of direction and purpose in my life. And fortunately, I have a wife who is a rock star and amazing and has a great sense of identity. And she pointed me to a guy named Sean Whalen. Represent. So Sean runs this apparel company, Lions Not Sheep, and he also runs a group called the Lion's Den, which is a group coaching program for becoming a better version of yourself. And I joined the group on my wife's urging, and on my first coaching call, he introduced me to his favorite book, which is called As a Man Thinketh by James Allen. And one of the key quotes in that book, as Michael referenced earlier, is a man is literally what he thinks, his character being the complete sum of all of his thoughts. And he went on over the course of subsequent calls to talk about the importance of thought and how what you think ultimately shapes who you are, and it shapes the habits that you have. And then in a perhaps the most monumental or impactful moment that I've had thus far in the Lion's Den is when he started talking about, so his coach is a man named Ed Mylett, who we all aggressively listen to his podcast. It's amazing.
Yeah.
And I mean, don't stop listening to this one to go listen to that one. But after you've listened to all of ours, like, then
Check
go
him
listen
out.
to Ed. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
But he was at an event with Ed, and Ed was sharing how many of the most successful people that he knows obsessively envision what success looks like to them long before they ever achieve that success. And of course, in retrospect, it's obvious. If you want to be a UFC champion, you don't just wake up and say, "Oh, look, I'm fighting for the championship today," and then go out and win. Like, you are a champion upstairs in your mind, and you train like a champion long before you even have a shot to enter the ring and fight for a title. But I never thought about it like that in the context of my life. And so that night, this was probably in October, maybe before, maybe September. So a couple months after joining the Den, I lay in bed that night and I began to meditate or envision on a mental image of myself. Like, what would the ideal me look like? And at first I was just focused on my body, how I looked. I'd be shredded, I was toned. But as the weeks rolled by, I kept doing this every night. And it was like the last thing I do before I go to bed. I started focusing more on like how I felt and how I would feel in my environment. And so at the beginning, it was like, hey, I'm ripped and shredded and I'm standing on this beach and I don't have a shirt on, which I'd never stood on a beach without a shirt and been like, fuck yeah, look at me. Or not that I needed people to look at me, but just I never felt confident and comfortable in that. So this vision just kept evolving over the weeks. At one point, my wife walked up to me and she was coming up from behind me and she gave me a hug. And rather than flinching away from that, instead, I just felt pride and I felt complete comfort in my skin. And my kid, like this, again, as this evolved, my little kids, I've got 4 of them and they're just these endless fountains of energy. They asked Dad to come and play and I would respond with like vigor and enthusiasm rather than like, give me 10 minutes or I'm going to read my book or I'm just not feeling it or whatever. And so like this was probably 2 months that I was envisioning this. And kind of when I transitioned to this beach vision, that version of myself with my family was off in the distance. But as I continued to envision night after night, I kept getting closer and closer to that ideal version of myself. And eventually I got close enough where I could hear this ideal me speaking to me saying, keep going, buddy, keep going, you'll get here. And after about 2 months, I finally walked up next to ideal me. Like, I finally got close enough, like within a foot or two of him. And he reached out and he embraced me and he simply said, I'm proud of you, man. Keep going. I'm proud of you. And it was this very profound moment for me. And I just I'm still emotional about it. This has been months later.
Yeah.
But the next night was really the most profound aspect of this whole experience. As I approached this ideal me and I went in for a hug, like my consciousness had been in the old kind of negative version of myself. And as I reached over for the hug that night, my consciousness flipped, and it went from the old me to the ideal version of me. And now I was looking back at like the old, lazy, excuse-ridden fat guy, and I was saying, thank you. Like, thank you for all the work you've put in to become who you need to be.
Yes. I mean,
So good.
you've told me this. I've heard this story multiple times from you. I remember the first time you told it to me when that had happened to you. And it, it's still like, fuck, man, like it's such a good, even if you're not watching this on YouTube, like you can like reading a book, like I can visualize you looking back at your old self saying like, thanks, bro. Like you got me here. I got it from here. Like we're going forward. That's like, fuck, that's inspiring.
And I mean, I appreciate that. It's inspiring to me too. And I hope it inspires others and really help people understand the power of this, because I think we've touched on this in the past, but since that moment, like everything and how I view the world has been different. I wasn't just somebody trying to work out and get fit. I now am the person, the fit and toned person that I've been envisioning. Now I'm not where I want to be physically, but it made that switch from I have to do this to I get to do this, right?
Yeah.
When you have this type of mindset, you naturally start making better choices. Like a fit and healthy person can't reach into the freezer for that pint of ice cream, right? And just mow it down, at least not on a regular basis. It runs contrary to who they are. These small daily decisions, right? They compound over time and they help me to achieve bigger changes. And ultimately, here is what I would say is the secret. And this comes from Dr. Andrew Huberman, is where I first heard about this. But your subconscious mind doesn't actually know the difference between what is real and what you imagine. Think about that. Your subconscious mind doesn't know the difference between what is real and what you imagine. So why don't we harness that? Why don't we use that to our advantage? Because I promise you, radically altering your thoughts in a positive way will result in a profound transformation in your life. And for me, going back to James Allen in the book As a Man Thinketh, he says that just as your conscious mind can be thought of as the gardener planting seeds, your subconscious mind can be thought of as a garden or fertile soil in which seeds germinate and grow. And because it's this subconsciousness that stores the aggregate of all of your past decisions, your past thoughts, and your beliefs, it forms who you are today. Or to turn it back to our topic du jour, it determines your identity.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, baby.
All right. So let's take a moment or a few moments to talk about identity and what it means. And ultimately, how I think what we've all experienced is that it is the conscious effort to change your thoughts that will change your identity. And it is the changing of your identity that harnesses the power of your subconscious to ultimately shape your actions. And this goes back to what I was saying, that when you change your identity, who you are in your gut, that subconsciously changes your actions. So you think about any time in your life when you've been trying to diet, or you've been trying to work out, or you've been trying to study, or you've been trying to do this, or you've been trying to do that, and you struggle with it because it's hard. But when you change your identity to somebody who just does those things, it subconsciously alters the actions that you take and the attitude that you have. So it's not hard work anymore. It's just what you do. And this becomes the get to versus have to. When you get to do it, you don't have to. How many times do you stop doing things because you don't want to? What happens when you decide that you want to subconsciously? You don't have to anymore.
Yeah. I mean, that's words are right there. It's like you change that, your mindset of like, it's like, it no longer becomes, oh, I got to do this. It's like, oh man, I am going to, like, I get to do this. It's just whatever that is for you, it makes just, you don't even have to think about it. You just do it.
It starts with recognizing that you can control your thoughts and your beliefs and your experiences, that circumstances don't happen to you, that you get to choose how you go through life. And if you have new thoughts, those should lead to new behaviors and new emotions that in the course of those new experiences help you shape your identity. And a lot of where I look to my thoughts about identity lately, I would say stem from Dr. Joe Dispenza. And he talks a lot about some of those things that you just mentioned, Scott, about subconscious thoughts and how most of the time subconsciously we're living in the past and living based on memories of the past. And in previous episodes here, we just talked about limiting beliefs. And why do we have those limiting beliefs? Well, it's because of a memory of the past where we tried to diet and it didn't work. And so we expect that the next time that we try to go on a diet, it's not going to work because we look at it as a small temporary, it's a temporary strategy instead of a lifelong strategy, or instead of a lifestyle strategy, which I think identity ultimately, it's taking a different look at your future and starting to embrace the unknown instead of expecting that your life is going to go the same way that it historically has. Because if I look back at my past and expect my future to go the same way, it's a pretty dismal outlook because of the mistakes that I've made. And so it all ties in to a lot of what we have been talking about in these past few episodes. But it's really powerful to hear that story, Scott, because it's something that I relate to in many ways, and not in the exact same concept, but certainly.
No, you're like a $1.50 soaking wet. So
right, but I'm working on it. But but the point is, everybody has a different area in their life where if they're
100%.
honest with themselves, if I'm honest with myself, there is something about me that needs to change. And if you're honest with yourself, there is something about you that could change.
And I wasn't.
Yeah.
It was one of the first calls as well with Sean. And if you know anything about Sean Whalen, you know he gets fiery. He gets fired up. So he goes off on this rant and he says, "If you got man titties and you haven't seen your dick in 6 months, that's your fucking fault. That's nobody else's fault." I'm sitting there going, I mean, okay, I can see my dick, but I get what he means.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
And it was right. We have so many kid gloves in society these days because everyone's so worried about offending everybody else. And I guess I was worried about offending myself. I don't know. But yeah, being honest and being willing to explore the naked truths about yourself, knowing that you're probably not going to like what you're going to find, especially if you've been avoiding that thing. Like, there's probably a lot of things, even now, that we're starting to awaken to these ideas that we still haven't fully confronted. But if you're willing to be honest about that, you will find things that you're not happy about. And then the question is, what are you going to do to change?
Yeah, that's the key. How honest with yourself can you be? I think beliefs are something that we can influence so strongly without even realizing it. And there's a concept from Napoleon Hill in a book called Think and Grow Rich called autosuggestion. You're telling yourself something. The more you tell yourself something, the more you're likely to believe it. And sometimes what you tell yourself is a lie. And oftentimes, at least for me, this is where I'm relating to what Scott was talking about there a little bit, where we like to downplay our deficiencies and our flaws and make the comparison and say, it's not as bad as this other person, or it's not as bad as it could be. And we start to buy into that lie until it becomes a part of our belief system. And so we're operating as if it's the truth when it isn't. And so many areas of my life, unfortunately, I got really good at lying to myself, at lying to others. And then your identity is based on something that's flawed and it's fragile. So looking back at the past few years, how my identity has shifted, I largely base my identity on a few different areas that are very influential, like society and cultural identity, and my identity as a man perceived by others. And a lot of those elements or parts of my identity were grounded in lies that I was telling myself about myself, that I wasn't enough or I wasn't worthy because of the things that I had done, the mistakes that I had made, my failures. I was starting to define myself as a failure because I had failed in the past. And that's exactly what we were talking about in the
Mhm.
past couple weeks here with the growth mindset. I was operating from a fixed mindset that because these certain circumstances had failed, and I'm talking about my relationship with my wife, my relationship with my kids, my relationship with God, my professional success by a lot of people's standards was success. But by my own standards, I knew it was a far cry from what my potential was. And when I looked at my position financially, set against what it could be, I looked at all those areas as I'm failing and therefore I'm a failure. And maybe I'm just not worth the
Mhm.
success in life that I thought that I could attain.
Well, this is the same reason why you hear about star athletes and people who win the lottery, why they end up broke in a few years. It's because they have the identity of somebody who isn't worthy of or doesn't deserve or hasn't earned that type of success. And so they have all of the bad habits that have grown out of their identity that manifest themselves all the same, even after a financial windfall. And that's why they end up broke.
Right.
It's because they
Right.
didn't believe that they deserved it.
Yeah.
And
And I know it's
the
different
best
for,
explanation I've
yeah.
heard. Go ahead.
Yeah. I just was going to say it's perceived as different for a celebrity or a star athlete than it is for you or I, but it's the exact same question that we're all asking ourselves about what our purpose is in life and if we are destined to repeat our past. And is this going to define me? Is this going to be who I am as a person? And unfortunately, I think a lot of times society will reinforce those negative limiting beliefs. And getting beyond that is actually a lot more simple. Not easy, but a lot more simple than I would have
That's what I was
thought.
going to say.
And it all starts with our thoughts, what we're thinking about at the beginning of the day and what we're thinking about at the end of the day and the resultant actions in between. And those behaviors are going to lead to different experiences for us depending on how we perceive the world. And
Well, you kind of hit that on the head when you said, you talked about, is this going to define me? What defines you? If you're worried about what's defining you, you're thinking about the outputs. We've talked about this in the past. If you're thinking about the outputs, your focus is in the wrong area, especially in life, because there are a lot of things that you can't control the outcome of. And if instead you are starting with the inputs, which as you described are your thoughts, if you start by improving your thoughts, a change in outcome is just a byproduct of that. Like increased improvement in the quality of thoughts and the quality of the questions that you ask yourself will naturally and organically lend themselves to better outcomes. That doesn't mean that bad shit's not going to happen to you. Of course it does. It happens to everybody. But how you deal with that, I think we can probably all think of a time in our life when something bad happened to somebody that we know or love and it completely derailed their whole life. But we can think of other examples, probably all of us, of people who have had bad shit happen to them and they were resilient and they overcame. And your
yeah,
ability to be resilient is going to be based on the quality of your thoughts and your ability to control your inputs, recognizing that sometimes bad shit just happens and it's how you deal with it and overcome it that defines you, not the other way around.
yeah, I would agree completely. And how my mindset shifted about those bad things that happened to me, instead of thinking about them as things that happened to me, I recognized these were a product of my decisions, and going through those things was required in order for me to grow. And it's different for the three of
Mhm.
us, what extent we evaluate those hardships. For me, I look to my faith a lot as a big differentiator in how I started to look at hardships. And this podcast isn't specifically about faith. I'm not going to go into it in depth here, but ultimately, I think we all do agree that hardship and going through struggle in life is something that's required in order to build strength and build resilience. And it's something that's common enough that I think it is a universal truth. And for me, the identity that I have as a believer did help navigate through some of those bigger challenges in the past year and help me dispel some of the lies I was telling myself. So it's a bit hard to sum up the past few years and how much my identity has actually remained the same. I just wasn't aware of the truth of what it was because of how many years I spent building an inaccurate perspective of the world. I'm not sure if that makes complete sense to
Or like
y'all or
an
not.
inaccurate version of yourself, maybe?
Well, right, I think I just kept on adding more layers of obfuscation
Mhm.
to who I was and not recognizing that the future for me is something that should be determining the unknown future of really good potential.
Mhm.
Really good is probably a weak way of saying it, of, limitless potential, if you will, was as equally available to me 3 years ago as it was now. But because of a lot of the layers that I was putting over who I was based on what I thought society wanted from me or what my parents or my family wanted from me to
Yeah.
some extent, I had to go through a lot of unfortunate struggle.
So let's wrap up with talking about how to change your identity. I know we've talked about how we have changed identity, but practically speaking, how do we start to believe that we can achieve and that we do deserve the success that is in front of us? Because the reality is, there's plenty of success in the future. If you were to craft what does the ideal next year look like, it's going to be filled with successes. And all of that is achievable. So, how do we change that identity and become that ideal?
You talked about the questions that you ask yourself. And so one of the most important questions that you have to ask yourself is, what would I feel like if I were to be successful in whatever area of life that you're struggling in right now,
And what
financially or health wise, and say, what would that feel like? And you have to start replacing the limiting beliefs that you have that isn't attainable and start, like you said, Scott,
this
envisioning
is why I
that
talk about
next version of yourself.
exactly. This is why I talk about obsessive envisioning, not just casually, obsessive envisioning.
Yeah. Yeah.
You touched on this earlier, Michael, that the more you think about something, the more it becomes real in your mind. So as you obsessively envision this ideal version of you, and as I described in my story, that ideal evolved over the course of months. And I started focusing less on just my physical attributes and more on, as you said, how I felt. And as that ideal became more entrenched in my subconscious, I found myself initially consciously and then eventually subconsciously in a dialogue asking, what would ideal me do in this situation? I walk into the pantry. I was a stress eater. That was a big problem that I had for most of my life. So I get stressed and I walk into the pantry, and old me would reach for a bag of chips and just 500 calories gone. But ideal me would say, whoa, 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 that's not what we do. And it didn't happen overnight, but over the course of months, this is where those compounding habits started really piling up. That ideal me was helping me make incremental decisions that were slightly better than yesterday. And this is why my argument for how you change your identity is you can become obsessed with who you want to become. And I don't mean that in a vanity sense. This isn't about obsessing over being some egotistical, maniacal douchebag. This is about if you were the best version of yourself, who would that be? And the more you imprint that upon your very identity, your soul, the more that person is going to be the one that's subconsciously making the decisions for you.
Hell yeah. I'm simple. It seems,
Yeah.
gosh, how would I say? It's not complicated, but you're exactly right.
Hard part about it is doing it consistently, because you
Mhm.
have to, like Scott, I think what you're talking about is essentially it's just rewiring your brain. It's rewiring those thought patterns. And you can do that every day. And it doesn't have to be a light switch that goes on that you flip and all of a sudden you're a new person.
Well, the
Because,
important part there is
yeah,
the old you is still there. You don't get rid of it.
right, right.
And
You just
so,
move 1% closer to that new version of yourself. And the more that you can start to have the feelings, have the
Mhm.
thoughts of the new version of yourself, or just recognize every day as an opportunity for you to change your thoughts, to change your actions, you're going to start having experiences that are more aligned with that new identity. And it isn't something that sometimes we want to admit, because to some extent, our bodies become addicted to the emotions that we've been experiencing for so
Mhm.
long
Even
that
negative
without
ones.
even, yeah, especially the negative ones.
Mhm.
And I'm talking about stress and anxiety and the worry that comes with a lot of those types of things, and depression and fear and unworthiness and resentment and bitterness, like all of those negative emotions that we tend to carry with us. We grow so accustomed to feeling those emotions that we have thoughts and subsequent actions and behaviors that really affect our circumstances negatively. So that's to your point earlier, Scott. You have to be honest with yourself about what are those things that are driving my decisions every day.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, I'm going to wrap up with my favorite quote from As a Man Thinketh. Before I do, Preston, anything you want to add on how you've changed your identity or how you would explain to others how to change theirs?
Okay. I mean, almost the way I look at identity is, I mean, it's very similar to you guys, but I almost feel like I'm in a reversed sort of context of it all, where my identity, there's an element of my identity that has a through line that started when I was about 15 years old and figured out what guitar was and figured out that I could play a G chord. And when I moved to California in high school and it was right when the internet was coming around, and I started learning how to play.
You're aging yourself.
Well, when I was a child back in the day.
Back in the 80s.
But I'd learned a few things on guitar, and I'd learned to play the first guitar solo I learned was of Wolf and Man by Metallica. And I remember being in my stepdad's office in Diamond Bar, California, and thinking, I'm just going to do what they do. Like that's going to be my job. I'm going to be a rock star. And I'm 40 years old now, and I'm obviously not a rock star. I mean, I am in the podcast
Yes,
world,
you are.
obviously. But my point is that right then and there, I built this identity of being a musician, and I've done tons of amazing things with music throughout my life. I've made money at it. I've lost money at it. I met my wife playing music. I wouldn't have met my wife if I wasn't a musician and doing the things I've done. And there have been moments in my life where I have put music down.
You mean like set it down or like disparaged it?
Like set it down. Like, I'm not going to do this right now. I'm going to
Okay.
focus on something else. I've quit this band and I'm going to not do this for a while, or I've just moved and I can't do this music. And whenever I don't have that in my life, so much of my identity, all of our identities are a culmination of multiple things, but music is so much a part of my identity that when I put it down, and I put it down for a year at a time, a few years at a time, I'm not 100% me. It's something that I need so much in my life because I love it. It was almost imprinted on me as a teenager. It's this thing that drives me, that feeds me, that connects me to life, that when I try to set it down and not and live my life without it, there's just an element missing in my life that it always comes back because I just need it. And it's not that I'm not satisfied with my family or my wife or my children, but I can't function without it being a part of my life. So I'm trying to find out how to incorporate that in the way that you guys were talking about it, because it's almost like a reverse way of how I'm trying to explain my identity.
So earlier, I talked about how your subconsciousness, it stores the aggregate of all of your past decisions, thoughts, and beliefs, and it
Right.
forms who you are today.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have all of these past beliefs, decisions, thoughts, that many of which are centered around music.
Mm-hmm.
And so for you, I know one of those stretches of time was actually in this last year, right?
Oh,
But
yeah.
when you moved to
Yeah.
Tennessee, you gave up music. And so for you, yeah, that is interesting. Where Michael and I have been on this journey to understand who we are or who we want to be. What is the ideal version of ourselves?
Mm-hmm.
And sure, there are aspects of that ideal version that we already have.
Right.
But here is a whole subset of new things that if I have the power to control who I am, these are core elements of who I am. Where what you've been going through is here is a core element of who I am. And at least until recently, that was missing in your life.
Correct. Yeah.
And so we're trying to figure out how to change our thoughts to become the person that we want to be. And you're like, well, yeah, there are definitely thoughts I want to change to become a better version of myself. But there's also this other person in myself, and I need to figure out how to shape my thoughts, my actions, and my life to ensure that that can maintain a prominent, daily, consistent part of my life.
Right. I
Yeah.
think it's talking about it from a different angle, that your level of self-awareness is taking a look back and recognizing that one of the key components to who you are, and something that I would agree with and resonates with me a lot, is this artistic, creative musician. And without that part of your identity, you feel like you aren't authentically yourself. And therefore, you can't see yourself in your current job unless it allows you to have that outlet, right? Maybe I'm a little bit off, but I think it's this part of identity is self-awareness and looking at yourself and understanding, to Scott's point, like taking an honest look at yourself and saying, what are some of the things that I really want to be a part of my future? And that rather music is part of that ideal. And
Totally.
it
Yeah.
should be a large part of that ideal because it really gets you excited. It's something that you're passionate about. And so there are all these different complex parts of our identities, what we do, who we are, how we think. But, we have the sort of standard roles that we play in society. And sometimes we get sucked into, I felt like that was the case for my job. I got sucked into the identity of, I'm going to work until I'm 65 because that's what society says a man should do. And
Right.
I disagree at this point. That was one of the lies I was telling myself. And one of the easier ones for me to see that this is not the way to live life.
Yes. Like we're going to work the best years of our life, the best years of our kids' lives, at least
Away
as
from
a
them.
parent,
Yeah.
away from them, to hopefully have enough money and enough years and health left to enjoy the last 10 or 20 years. Like,
What a shame.
whole separate topic.
What a
That'll be
shame
next,
and what a sham.
yes, that'll be next week's episode.
But yeah, Preston, thanks for sharing that, because I think it's something that a lot of us, we choose to give up our dreams to pursue what society tells us to pursue. And we reshape our thinking around what somebody else's dreams are.
Mhm.
And to use another analogy, I'm building somebody else's dream in my current job. It certainly isn't my dream to deliver electricity and gas to our customers.
And
Right?
I
That's not
think
my dream.
I think to bring it back to the identity, like, when I was 15 thinking I was going to be the next Metallica or the guitar player in some sort of Metallica, it's like, I'm not 40 still thinking, why I can still be in the lead guitar player of the next Metallica. It's not about that. It's about, there was some point in my life where I identified with something creative that just really was a giant piece of my pie of like fulfillment in life.
Right.
And when I put that down for periods in my life to focus on, I guess, I hate the word adulting. That's so stupid, but sometimes you just need to focus on certain aspects of your life. And when I do set that down, I really feel a whole. And every time I've done that, I've done it a few times, and you think by now I would realize, don't put that aside. I mean, it came to this point where even my wife in the 6 months we were here, she's like, why are you not in a band? Like, what the hell are you doing out here? We're in fucking Nashville. Right.
Oh my gosh.
And I'm like, yeah, you're probably right. I should get that going. But,
I think this goes back to something we talked about earlier, which is when you put your attention on something, your brain, your subconscious mind is going to go to work on helping to solve that for you. And
yes, dude. Yes.
If you're saying, I want to play music, I want it to be a part of my life, I'd like to make some money doing it as well. If that's something that you're actively thinking about, if you're actively pursuing, and that's an objective for you, and you've made the decision that this is the ideal version of me, this is where I'm saying put your subconscious to work, because that's what your brain does. It solves problems.
Yeah.
And so if you feed it the problems that you want to solve, it will work on it while you're sleeping, while you're chopping wood, while you're cold plunging, right? Like all of these times in your life that you don't really realize your brain is actively solving problems for you, or I should say subconsciously solving problems for you. It is. And so when you choose to set things down like that and not give it attention, what you're doing is you're saying, subconscious, I don't want you to work on this. It's no longer important to me.
Yeah.
And that your subconscious only works on the things that are important to you. Ed Mylett talks about the reticular activation system. Actually, several coaches and mindset coaches do, because that is the part of your brain that determines what is important and what to actually make you aware of. Right? Because if you think of all the stimulus that we're receiving right now, even just each of us in our rooms, if your brain had to process all of it right now, it would explode. Right? It's impossible to manage and process all of the stimulus. So your RAS, your reticulating activating system, it's what filters those things out. And so it only allows the things that are important to you, or that you've told it are important, to come to the surface. This is why if you hear a word and you think it's for the first time and suddenly you hear it like 3 more times, no, that word wasn't just invented, unless it's like YOLO and it was the first time you heard YOLO. But everything else, they're here all the time, but for whatever reason, you heard it once and it became like you became aware of it, and now your brain filtered it in rather than filtered it out.
Yeah.
And so if you're filtering out music and the things that are important to you around music and a living, like all the opportunities that you missed because you weren't tuned in to that part of your brain, that part of your life.
That's really good.
All right, guys, go ahead and end with my favorite quote from As a Man Thinketh by James Allen. He says, the vision that you glorify in your mind, the ideal that you enthrone in your heart, this you will build your life by. This you will become.
Best quote of the show so far, maybe. I love it.
And that is a wrap for episode 6 of the Reclaiming Man podcast. Please come check us out on reclaimingman.com. Join our newsletter. We promise not to spam you, but we will send you very interesting tidbits about the realness or fakeness of Preston's beard. We do have some really exciting things.
It continues.
We have some very exciting things planned for the podcast. Some giveaways. We'll have some events coming up that we're pretty excited to share with y'all. So the first place to hear about that will be on our newsletter. You can also find us on TikTok and Instagram at Reclaiming Man, YouTube as well, Reclaiming Man, and our Reclaiming Man Facebook group.
Yeah.
And we're really interested in having this conversation with one another, but we're also interested, as you saw today in today's episode, Michael and I have one perspective on how we've viewed identity and the reshaping of our identity, and Preston's is completely different, and that's great. And that's what part of why the three of us came together was to provide different insights and ideas and thoughts around this whole process. And we'd love to hear from you. So come find us on the interwebs, back when Preston invented the internet.
You can slide into my...
All right, on that note, episode 6, that's a wrap.
Have a great night, gentlemen. Happy Friday.
right.
See you around, tribe.
See you around, tribe.